Hi class, this is the mini lecture on chapter 4, which is how to use your body as part of your presentation oral performance, um, sometimes known as paralinguistic cues. That's part of it. And it really focuses on maybe taking some of that nervous energy um, and making it part of your performance, and about how not to have your body betray the emotion of the piece, to have it align with whatever the general content is of the text that you choose to perform. And a quote I selected from the text says, "No performer worth watching is free of fear, regardless of how long he or she has been working. But when the tension is performance directed, it becomes energizing, a surge of intense living. If you dance, run, engage in strenuous physical exercise, you know the adrenaline high that comes from everything works as planned." Okay, so you're going to be a little nervous before your first performance and maybe throughout the whole semester. I remember when I used to participate in oral interpretation myself. I did forensics competitions and I've done a lot of acting. And I remember somebody telling me, if you're not nervous, you're probably too comfortable. You're probably not going to perform well. So there's always a teeny bit of edge, which is a good thing. Okay. Um, Remember that performance is a moment when you're inside somebody else's skin. You'll be inside the skin of the person, the speaker, or the narrator of your piece. A couple key things from chapter 4. What is a set? A set are all of the behavioral mannerisms that accompany your performance, from coming out of your chair, out of the audience, up forward to perform. So it's always this idea that you want to project confidence and that you're ready to go. Okay. Beware of physical habits. Your hands on your hips. Let me see if I can say that. See, like I used to always do this, see that when I performed. And every time I would perform a piece, as the presentation would go on, I couldn't help but slowly, my arms would be itching, inching up. And I had to stop that because the hands on my hips generally weren't part of my character. They were more part of my cheerleader persona from high school. So you need to make sure that you don't allow your own personal tics to find a way into your performance unless it's part of them. But you're going to have your own habit. I've had girls who like spun their hair, or who I had a student last year who had a real particular tick, always going like this, and somebody who always wanted to look up. So kind of have your friends watch you or watch yourself and figure out what is a tick or a behavioral mannerism that I do quite frequently that might not fit with my text. Now, if it fits with the characters in your text, go ahead. Okay. Um, Nonverbal communication is huge in oral interpretation. We talked in the last lecture about how the sound of your voice, your face, and your body, these things need to come together and not work against each other. Okay. The joke is the happy student who talks about death or something awful and smiles during the whole presentation, and his face belies the message of his piece. We want to work on not doing that. Okay. You want to be aware, your book calls these mimetic gestures. Okay. It'd be like saying, maybe your piece is about someone, you're like, oh, I'm hungry, or I think I have a good idea. Those are mimetic gestures. And maybe my standing up there a moment just made you giggle because they can have that effect. Occasionally, a gesture to mime content can be effective. Now, what I found interesting in the Les Mis exercise that we did at the beginning of the course, a lot of you really noted a kind of a sound mimesis where a voice, perhaps the pitch would drop, and you would say it's a low pitch to indicate the character has a low moment in his or her life, probably his because it was Jean Valjean. But that's interesting, So there's a moment for those things to work. I won't say never use a mimetic gesture, but be very leery of them. If your character's talking about brushing his teeth and you're up there going, it's probably going to be more distracting than anything else. Okay. Um, why would muscle tone be important concerning the fulcrum? Well, the fulcrum is um, the a physical climax of your poem, or the turning point. We always think of this idea of a teeter-totter, and the fulcrum is that middle point that allows the teeter-totter to go up and down like this. It's the middle point. It is not always the same place as the climax, but it is a kind of turning point, and you really want to use your body to convey that. If it's a moment of great tension and you're like, you're just real flopsy, okay? It's not going to convey that. You want to have that intensity. You want us to be able to see that your muscles are firm, not floppy. Okay, so you want to use muscle tension to convey fulcrum, climax, or even just the general emotional state of a speaker, narrator, or character moving through a text. This is one of the areas I very often see students neglect. They become adept at controlling their voices. Their memory work can become good. They might be able to use facial expressions pretty well, but sometimes we neglect controlling our general muscles as well. But the best performances are going to take that in as well. You're just, watch people. That's what you have to do in the workshop this week. And watch people, and you'll be surprised by how much you can tell about somebody by the way they're holding their body. What muscle tension do they have working? I know I hold mine on my shoulder. It's what my chiropractor tells me, because I'm always, I'm kind of an intense person. I'm geared up. So use that. Use your body tension. Use your body language, particularly your posture, the way you hold your muscles when you're presenting. Think about imagery. If there's imagery in your text, how are you going to convey that? If your text is talking about something that's very, maybe an image that's far off, like you're looking at a star, it might be that your face kind of shows that looking up. So there are ways to use our bodies to capture imagery that's in the text. Sometimes that could border on a mimetic gesture. So you have to make the decision if it's drawing attention to the content and working for what you're trying to do, or if it's a distraction. So many of the things in oral interpretation are like writing. They're one of my jobs, and one thing the textbook does, is to make you aware of the many choices you can be making when you're presenting this text. Just like when you're writing a paper, you have to choose what's going to convey my point the best here, a short sentence or a very long cumulative sentence. Do I want to have a one sentence paragraph to turn the idea of this essay here, or do I need a fully developed paragraph with elaborate transitional material? It's not always that one of these things is right or wrong. It is that one of these things will be your choice as the best way to convey that moment. So we really want to see you making choices in your oral performance. When I read your self-evaluation, you'll be able to explain some of the choices that you thought you were making. Sometimes I might go, and I might miss it. That's why the self-evaluation is so important, because you can say to board, here I meant to really extend this pause. Here I meant to have this kind of body tension. Probably if you have to tell me, it wasn't as obvious as you thought it was, but at least I can kind of track some of the techniques that you were trying to apply. Okay. We talked a little bit about performer empathy, and this was an earlier note, but the ideal performance is what happens in the classroom on the days that these performances occur is really neat. And I hope that we can somehow create this experience. But there's this communion that occurs beginning with the text, and the text back to the performer, and the performer to the audience, and the audience back to the performer. So there's just exchange of sympathies and engagement that on the really great days that occurs. I mean, as a performer, when you look out and see the audience just poised on your words and just, smiling, and everybody will always be very encouraging, because we want each other to succeed, So that communion between text, audience, and performer really is one of the things that kind of the synergistic moment we want to go for in class. We talked about placing the eyes before, and this is just a reminder, talking to self, eyes out front, focused on a point in front of the face. If you're talking to yourself, kind of the invisible sphere. We talked about if you're talking to a God or a non-present or non-physical other, or talking to another character. And again, these are choices you want to make about your eye placement, choices that are obvious when you're performing, and that are consistent throughout the performance. Things to think about: your posture, your muscle tone, empathy, gestures. Okay, gestures are very important. I think discuss this in this chapter, but gestures, especially with your hands, have this way of triggering a thought process. So when you do a gesture like this, like I remember, it has a way of inviting the audience to remember with you. If you say, there was this little farmhouse over the corner, and it's a very simple gesture, but my hands have a way of inviting the audience to think of a little farmhouse over the corner. So you really want to have a well-placed and probably planned gesture, 3 or 4 in your presentation. Um, you want to use them to pull on memory. Even if the audience doesn't have the same memory the speaker does, the audience can kind of marry personal experience with what you're saying, and gestures really invite that. Okay, I think that's it. All right, we're getting closer to your first performance because at this point we're through how to analyze the text. We're through vocal control and body control, so we're getting ready next week to move into the specific techniques related to poetry. So you really this week need to be picking your poem. Your poem performance should be 2 minutes or more, not including your introduction. Like I said in the last mini lecture, you can work with a friend or a peer if you two want to be taped together. It can be really neat to see how two poems contrast each other, either in theme, style, or how they rely on some kind of intertextuality. If you do that, you and your partner each get separate scores for your performances, and you do each submit your own paper analyzing your poem. So it's really not much of a relief from the workload. It's just kind of having someone to rehearse with and create this kind of cool experience that comes from juxtaposing text that mean more when they're placed next to each other than they may alone. Um, so really be thinking of your poem. If you have your poem selected already and want me to look at it to make sure that it bears, that it will hold up to 5-7 pages of analysis. If I think it would be good for performance, I'm happy to check poems. Um, but just want you to be thinking about that because now the course really starts to pick up. You will be considering a genre, writing a paper, practicing a genre performance, considering another genre, writing a paper, practicing performance. So we go pretty quickly from here on out. So have a good week. Bye.